It was January 30th, 2014. Two local men, Emil Libocmento and Russell Lakidrick, stared at the twisted body laid out on the shore. They'd rushed across the lagoon in the Marshall Islands deep in the heart of the Pacific Ocean when they noticed the drifting remains of a fishing boat off in the distance. But what nobody expected was that the body that had just washed up on the shore could still be alive. He was undressed, clutching a knife and screaming in Spanish. It seemed impossible that anyone could have survived on their own out there, and judging by his appearance, he'd been on the water for quite some time. His hair was matted, his beard curling outward, unkempt like some kind of lagoon-dwelling wild man. His ankles had swollen up, leaving him barely able to walk, while his wrists were tiny and weakened. He hid his face from Russell and Emmy, refusing to look either of them in the eye. His name was José Salvador Alvarenga. He'd been adrift for 438 days, floating 6,700 miles across the Pacific Ocean. He wasn't supposed to survive, and when he'd first set out, he hadn't been alone. By the age of 37, José Salvador Alvarenga had been fishing for sharks in Mexico for decades. The fisherman, originally from El Salvador, was something of an expert. He would take out a small skiff, normally accompanied by a friend, a fellow fisherman, and travel into the Pacific Ocean. A few days would pass, 2-3 at the most, and Alvarenga would return with his crewmate, hauling several sharks after a successful catch. His employer would buy Alvarenga's haul for 50 cents to a pound, hardly a lot of money for all those days spent waiting for the sharks to swim close enough to the skiff, but Alvarenga would make enough to get by. But one Saturday, November 17th, back in 2012, he would take a trip that would irreversibly change the course of his life. When Alvarenga was around 36 or 37 years old, he was due to take yet another trip out to sea. He planned to take a long, grueling 30-hour shift on the water, something that only an experienced sailor and fisherman like him would be equipped for. Even then, Alvarenga would still be spending a long time deep-sea fishing in the hopes of returning with an assortment of sharks, marlins, and sailfish. Everything was prepared as it usually was. The skiff was ready to set out, but there was a problem. Alvarenga's usual crewmate, a close friend with whom he'd been on many prior fishing trips, someone almost as experienced as he, didn't show up. Going out on the water alone after such a long time was far too risky. But with everything arranged and a need to return having caught something, Alvarenga was backed uncomfortably into a corner. His employer wouldn't be too pleased if the trip was canceled on such short notice, so Alvarenga needed a second. But with no sign of his regular fishing partner, he was forced to think on his feet. Over on the nearby beach, he spotted something that seemed to present him with an answer to his problem. There was a group of men working down on the beach, any one of them able enough, it seemed, to help Alvarenga. Even if they hadn't done all that much sailing, he felt that he certainly possessed the decades' worth of expertise to compensate. So Alvarenga approached the workers down on the beach and struck up a conversation with them. He explained his situation and that he needed someone to help him for a long shift of deep-sea fishing. It'd be hard work lasting well over a day, but eventually one of the workers came forward. His name was Ezequiel Cordoba, a man that José Salvador Alvarenga had never met nor spoken to before in his life. He didn't even ask the younger man his surname before the two readied the boat to set sail. Neither of them could have predicted what would happen next. Much as Alvarenga had expected, his newly recruited shipmate was a rookie when it came to seafaring. Not that Alvarenga had foresaw this causing an issue. Boarding the skiff and heading out, the two departed from Costa Azul, a fishing village near Pijijiapan, just off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico. Their craft was a 23-foot fiberglass skiff, roughly around the size of an SUV, with no top and running on a single outboard motor. There was an icebox on board the size of a refrigerator for storing their catches. Ready for the long, almost 2-day trip they were facing, Alvarenga and Cordoba began sailing the skiff along a pre-planned course out onto the Pacific Ocean. However, it doesn't take long for things to start going wrong. At first, the two men are working well together, and catching a lot too. Before long, they had amassed the better part of almost 1,000 pounds of fresh fish and thrown it in the icebox. And that was when they noticed the storm approaching. From a distance, it didn't look so bad to Alvarenga, maybe some impending choppy waters and nasty wind speeds, but nothing too severe, especially with all of his experience. It was a gamble, but with Cordoba's help, he was catching plenty of fish, so he decided to stay put for the time and keep reeling in the abundant sharks that swam in the waters. They kept the skiff in the water until the storm rolled in, and it started to look less and less like they were going to keep afloat. So Alvarenga made the call. It was time to head back to shore. But as they turned in the direction they came from, the storm was whipping the sea into a frenzy, jostling the skiff this way and that, until, unbeknownst to both Alvarenga and Cordoba, they were driven off course. Soon enough, the waves started getting bigger, so much so that the water started to come crashing into the boat. It seeped into the inner workings of the skiff, flooding the engine. Then the engine died. Carried by the furious tides, the boat started to drift. Aboard a tiny vessel with no sails, no oars, no anchor, Alvarenga and his rookie shipmate were lost in the open ocean. Within hours of losing the skiff's single outboard motor, the huge, relentless storm hammered down on them from above. It caused massive swells in the water, causing the boat to lurch violently up and down, enough to make even a seasoned seaman sick to his stomach. What's worse, even though the motor had died, it was still affixed to the back of the skiff, dead weight, and heavy at that, which started to throw off the weight distribution across the entire boat. It started spinning around uncontrollably, hurling much of Alvarenga's fishing nets and other equipment overboard. The few portable electronics aboard the skiff were thrown into the water or damaged beyond use. But thinking quickly, Alvarenga grabbed the two-way radio and made a distress call to his employer. He had seconds to get through to someone back on the shore, alerting them that he and Cordoba desperately needed help right before the radio's battery died, rendering it useless. Struggling to regain control of the spinning skiff, Alvarenga realized there was another large weight aboard, causing uneven distribution across the boat, all the fish they had caught. Even though he and Cordoba had successfully caught around 1,100 pounds of fish, right now they were in a crisis. They could always catch more fish on a clearer day, but not if they went overboard and died out here in the storm. Making the tough call, Alvarenga and Cordoba were forced to dump everything they caught overboard, in the hopes that it would make the skiff easier to maneuver in the unforgiving weather. As they threw the fish overboard, the powerful waves carried them all away, along with their nets and the majority of their tools. What few electronics had been aboard the skiff were now destroyed, leaving the two men no way to contact the shore or to further signal for help. Alvarenga had succeeded in contacting his boss, but without a way to pinpoint the boat's location, it would be hard enough to find them, even if it wasn't for the storm and the waves carrying them off course. Both of them frantically using their hands to scoop water out of the boat or bailing out the skiff. All the while, Alvarenga and Cordoba were screaming at each other, spending hours and hours battling against the water, getting aboard the boat, and threatening to sink it. The storm lasted for 5 whole days, nearly an entire week. When the storm ended and the sea went calm, Alvarenga took a look at their surroundings for the first time since departing Costa Azul. To his astonishment, there was nothing around but a wide open ocean. No land in sight, nothing to give him any indication of where they were, how far away the shoreline was, hell, even what direction they need to head to reach dry land if they could move at all. There were only 2 safety features aboard the skiff, one of them being a Ziploc bag containing a cell phone, but thanks to the waves carrying them further from the shore, the boat was nowhere near close enough to land for cell coverage to reach them. The only other option was a barrel to use for flotation if the boat sank. Just grab onto the barrel and hold on for dear life, either until a rescue boat finds you or until you can't hold on any longer. That was it, the full and bleak extent of Alvarenga and Cordoba's very limited options, and as if those weren't bad enough, the way the skiff was painted made it much harder to spot if anyone came looking for them. The inside of the boat was blue, with the outside painted white. It was almost perfectly camouflaged against the ocean, meaning the rescue looked like it would be even less likely to happen, if at all. Since the fishing gear aboard had been lost or damaged in the storm, the 2 men were left with only basic supplies and very little in the way of food to keep themselves alive. Beyond just the clothes on their backs, Alvarenga and Cordoba were left with a handful of matches, a small mirror the size of a baseball, and a stick. Thinking they spotted a cargo ship in the distance, the 2 men attempted to catch the attention of the crew on board, hurriedly tying one of their shirts to the end of the stick and lighting it on fire. Alvarenga waved it around in the air, trying to flag down the larger boat in hopes that anyone would spot the flames at a distance and divert the cargo ship toward him and Cordoba, bringing them aboard and back to the safety of dry land. After a few moments, it became painfully apparent that the ship's crew had not noticed Alvarenga and Cordoba, and keeping the shirt burning risked setting the whole skiff ablaze. So, putting the fire out, the 2 men changed tactics, grabbing the small mirror that they had in hand, trying to angle it just right so that they could catch what little sunlight there was. They made several agonizingly futile attempts to use the reflection to signal the cargo ship. What few glints of refracted light they managed to make are either missed or ignored completely. Before long, the cargo ship in the distance had already slowly drifted out of view, leaving the 2 men stranded and alone once more. Meanwhile, closer to the shore, Alvarenga's employer was attempting to track down the missing fishing boat. Having received the radio message from the adrift skiff, he gathered a search party. However, thanks to the storm rolling its way toward the shore, visibility at sea was poor, and after just 2 days, the search had to be called off entirely, leaving Alvarenga and Cordoba on their own. Days at sea turned to weeks, some of them passing without rain, leaving both men on the verge of death. thanks to intense dehydration. The thirst was unbearable. Alvarenga could feel his tongue had swollen up inside his mouth, so much so he could hardly even speak. Had it not been for the eventual arrival of rainwater, both stranded sailors would have undoubtedly suffered a slow, painful death. Soon enough, they began to drift across discarded water bottles floating in the ocean, and even an empty 55-gallon oil drum. Acting quickly, Alvarenga and Cordoba started to grab as much of the floating plastic waste out of the ocean as they could. Sadly, this wasn't a climate-conscious effort to clean up the Pacific, but more of a necessity. They needed to gather plastic bottles so they had something to catch any future rainwater in. All in all, they managed to get a hold of 72 small bottles, as well as the oil drum, ready for when it next rained. Although Alvarenga and Cordoba were still stranded at sea, they could now collect drinking water whenever it rained. But being able to save up rainwater had only marginally improved their chances of survival. Neither of them would live long without food, even if they did now have a way to stay hydrated. With their time at sea gradually getting longer and no sign of a rescue on its way to save them, the two were soon forced to scavenge food from any sources that presented themselves, no matter how unappealing. Occasionally, they were able to salvage saltwater sodden bits of food along with plastic refuse they found floating in the water. Other times, they had to get, let's call it, creative. Over the first month, the two men managed to catch turtles with their bare hands. They were still relatively close to shore, albeit off course and not close enough to see land. But the area they were adrift in had several groups of sea turtles swimming through it, and with no other options, Alvarenga and Cordoba had to take what little food they could get their hands on. Alvarenga would snatch turtles out of the water when they were close enough to the skiff, bringing them aboard so he could kill them. As he did, he'd have Cordoba collect up the turtle's blood inside some of the empty plastic bottles they retrieved. This wasn't to conduct some bizarre maritime sacrificial ritual to appease some dark ocean god and save them. No, both men would drink bottles of turtle blood. While they were still near the shore, there were also plenty of small sharks, which of course Alvarenga was an expert at catching. Even without his nets and other fishing gear, he would wait until one swam up next to the boat, keeping an eye out for the smaller sharks, anything that was less than 2 to 3 feet in length. And once one started to follow them, Alvarenga would quickly reach into the water and grab it by its rear fin. Bringing their catch aboard, the two men wouldn't just eat the unappealing raw shark meat, they would also make sure to eat the shark's liver, too. They were full of healthy fish oils and enough nutrition to sustain them. Thanks to their absurd diet of sea turtle meat and shark liver, all washed down with rainwater or turtle blood, the two stranded men were able to stay alive for a little longer. On some occasions, though, both Alvarenga and Cordoba were forced to collect and drink their own urine to survive, when there hadn't been enough rainfall or when they'd run low on turtle blood. Then, as they started to drift further away from the shore, their access to food sources changed dramatically. When they'd only days earlier had turtles and sharks to catch, suddenly Alvarenga and Cordoba found themselves in search of other ways to feed themselves. Luckily, or as lucky as was possible this far out in sea, there were seabirds flying overhead as Alvarenga and Cordoba drifted further and further from their previous food sources. But getting them to come close enough to catch and eat would be tricky. How Alvarenga got around this was lying in wait, using the stick they'd been unable to signal the cargo ship with, and positioning it so the birds would be prompted to come close and land on it. Of course, any sudden movements would just cause them to fly away again, so Alvarenga bid his time, waiting for the seagulls that landed on the stick to start preening their feathers and even sitting down to sleep. Once their guard was down, he'd swipe an arm out quickly and grab a startled gull by the leg, then break its wings so it couldn't fly away. As cruel as it sounds, it would leave the birds wounded but still alive. And the more he caught, the more Alvarenga could build up a long-term food supply and eventually kill and eat them. But as some seafaring will tell you, it's bad luck to kill a seabird. Surviving on their stash of seagull meat, both Alvarenga and Cordoba might have been alive for now, but they were hardly comrades. The two men were now stuck together and each forced to rely on a stranger for survival. To shield themselves from the sun, the two used the styrofoam boxes they would have kept fish in, flipping it upside down and essentially living inside it, hunched over, confined and claustrophobic, just to prevent themselves from being struck down by overexposure to heat. They spent so much time in the box that their bodies crumpled, both slipping vertebrae in their spines. Tired, hungry, and fearful for their lives, and now literally living on top of each other, it didn't take long for both Alvarenga and Cordoba to start arguing. Their fights were explosive, partly because were it not for Alvarenga needing help, Cordoba wouldn't be stuck in this situation. The tensions were all made worse by the stark contrast between the two men. Alvarenga was originally from Garita Palmera in El Salvador, before leaving for Tonala in Chiapas, Mexico in 2002. He'd left a family behind in El Salvador and hadn't been in touch with them for years. His own daughter Fatima was 12 years old at the time and had no memory of her father. Even his parents, José Ricardo Oriana and Maria Julia Alvarenga, thought that their son had died years ago. Alvarenga was a wild card. He'd make several $100s fishing and then return to shore to party with his earnings. He'd even had 3 girlfriends, neither of whom knew about each other. Then there was Ezequiel Cordoba, his fellow stranded shipmate, a man who couldn't have been more different from Alvarenga. The 23-year-old was a devout evangelical Christian, a man who believed in God and the teachings of the Bible. Alvarenga had the completely opposite view of religion. He had long ago decided that by never going inside a Catholic church, he had no reason to follow its rules. Having never set foot inside a church, he never felt as though he disobeyed or betrayed God because he had never sworn that he would. So aboard that boat with a man whose beliefs were antithetical to his own, Cordoba slowly started to panic. He believed that it was the will of God himself that he was stuck aboard the skiff and that he was destined to perish at sea. Despite their ideological clashes, their completely different outlooks, Alvarenga was enough of a veteran fisherman to sense that his young crewmate was becoming more and more unsettled. He tried to calm Cordoba by telling him stories and discussing what they'd do once they reached the shore. He began promising that he'd go to shore and return to the boat with oranges and tacos, just as a way of comforting his panicking crewmate. Before long, Alvarenga was describing an entire fiction for Cordoba about what they would do when they reached the shore. It was all he could do to keep the younger man sane. The men tried to keep track of time by counting the phases of the moon. At night, they would gaze up at the stars, making shapes out of the constellations just to pass the time. For Cordoba, his faith led him to see meaningful spiritual symbols and imagery, while party animal Alvarenga saw tequila bottles above. During the copious downtime they had during the days, they would sing while alternating who was sheltering from the sun in the styrofoam box. Cordoba was, as it turned out, quite the singer, and even though Alvarenga could barely hold a tune, he'd join in as the 2 men held the chorus, their voices going back and forth. As they lay on their backs, they would see planes passing overhead and imagine elaborate feasts that the passengers would be eating all those miles in the sky above. Over time, Alvarenga started to develop a sense of responsibility for Cordoba, making sure to care for the other man aboard the skiff. It sounds almost idyllic, but it was merely a distraction from the vast open ocean around them, the continuing passage of time, and the likelihood that both of them were going to die aboard that boat. Roughly 6 to 10 weeks had passed since Alvarenga and Cordoba had set sail, almost 2 months since the storm had set them adrift. The 2 had been using the moon to try to determine how soon Christmas was, given that it had been mid-November when they became stranded. The pair decided to have a Christmas dinner of sorts, 2 of their captured seabirds each, hardly traditional, but they worked with what they had available. Alvarenga killed and filleted 2 of the birds and cooked them to the best of his ability. But the moment Cordoba started to eat, he began to gag. Bile spewed from his mouth, and neither man could figure out what was wrong, and Cordoba's condition was quickly getting worse. That was when Alvarenga checked the carcass of the bird he filleted, only to find a small snake in its stomach. And that is what poisoned Cordoba. Alvarenga did what he could to help the younger man in his care, desperately trying to keep him alive, but neither one of them was sure he'd make it through the night. To their astonishment, Cordoba survived, and Alvarenga did everything he could to nurse his crewmate back to health, but the damage had already been done. Cordoba couldn't trust the food he ate now, terrified that his next bite of anything would kill him in an instant. He'd been moments away from death, but now he refused to do the one thing that would keep him alive: eat. Alvarenga tried to encourage him to take food, even trying to feed him like a baby by putting the food on the end of toothpicks, the bones of the fish that they'd eaten. But Cordoba refused time and time again, unable to eat in confidence. He'd become so afraid of the food that he gradually started to wither away. 4 months into their seemingly endless journey, Cordoba gave up all hope of ever being rescued. Starvation was taking hold of him, his refusal to eat gradually, painfully killing him. Before long, he died in Alvarenga's arms, after making his stranded shipmate promise to not eat his corpse. Alvarenga kept his promise. For 4 days after Cordoba died, the remaining fishermen contemplated just giving in. Left alone, he kept his now dead shipmate's corpse propped up at the bow of the fishing skiff and began to talk to it, as if Cordoba was still alive. As the body started to turn purple, he asked what death was like, hoping that it was peaceful. He contemplated why both of them hadn't died, why he was now continuing to suffer alone, lost in the endless ocean. He remembered how Cordoba had been earlier in their journey, how the younger man was hysterically crying about his mother, how they would talk about all the food they missed from their lives on land. In his dying hours, all of the pain and suffering from starvation had faded, and the younger man's death had ended his agony. Alvarenga spent 6 days having a one-sided conversation with Cordoba, but soon he realized that he'd been speaking aloud to a dead man and worried that he was starting to go insane. So Alvarenga decided that, for the sake of his own sanity, he had to get rid of Cordoba. The remains were thin, his frame was wiry due to starvation, and withered under the heat of the sun. Effortlessly, Alvarenga carried the body to the edge of the skiff and slipped it into the ocean. Now he was facing the rest of his hellish journey with nobody to talk to. Roughly 10 weeks had passed, and Alvarenga's boat had continued to drift through the Pacific Ocean. He noticed more birds flying overhead. Spotting one that seemed to be different from the others, prompting it to land on the skiff, he didn't kill it or break its wings. This time he kept it. Adopting the small bird and naming it Pancho, Alvarenga made a little shelter for his new pet, feeding him for a time. For the first time since Cordoba had died, the fisherman wasn't alone anymore. But as more and more time passed, Alvarenga found himself getting hungrier. There are hardly any birds or fish in the area of the ocean he'd reached, and day by day, he began to run low on the supply of seabirds he'd kept aboard the boat. One day, he had 6 left, and then before he knew it, only 4. Alvarenga, with a heavy heart, looked at Pancho. By the time he'd counted his 15th lunar cycle, Alvarenga spotted something in the distance that he'd been hoping to see for the last 438 days. Land. Getting closer, he frantically abandoned the skiff he'd been trapped on for over a year and started to swim toward the island in the distance. Battling icy waves of salt water, he forced his arms to move, summoning what little strength he had left to carry himself to shore. On January 30th, 2014, José Salvador Alvarenga had reached land. He had drifted from Costa Azul to Ibon, a tiny, desolate islet in a remote corner of the Marshall Islands. It had a population of only 700 people, none of them speaking a word of Spanish, and only one phone on the entire island. Over 430 days and more than 6,500 miles later, he was on terra firma again, but his struggle wasn't over. Stumbling up to a beach house owned by a local couple, Alvarenga was rushed to the hospital. Doctors assessed his vital signs to be good, but his blood pressure was unusually low. His ankles had swollen too. While adrift, he had taken to putting his feet over the side of the boat in the water in order to prevent his skin from drying out and splitting in the intense heat. But this had made it hard for Alvarenga to walk now that he was back on land. He had scars on his fingers too, left behind by the pecks of the gulls that he had tried to kill by hand. Within days, his condition began to deteriorate, and he was placed on an intravenous drip to treat his severe hydration. It took 11 days in the hospital for the doctors to deem Alvarenga healthy enough to return to El Salvador. But he was hardly back to his old self. He'd been diagnosed with anemia, meaning his blood could no longer carry much oxygen around his body. For long after the ordeal, he had trouble sleeping, having developed a fear of going near water. Still, even though they'd lost contact with him and believed him to be dead years before he went missing at sea, Alvarenga's family were relieved to learn he was still alive. His story was soon broadcast around the world, but with it came a large dose of skepticism. Many thought that it was impossible that a person could survive for so long at sea on a small skiff. Even Ezequiel Cordoba's family didn't believe the story and would later attempt to sue Alvarenga for $1 million. They firmly believed that the castaway fisherman had eaten the body of their relative to survive, despite Alvarenga swearing that he'd promised not to. Others claimed that it would be impossible to live for the 13 months that Alvarenga had survived without developing scurvy. And where most survivors of maritime ordeals were typically left fragile and emaciated, Alvarenga had been well fed. People started to try to poke holes in his claims. His recollection of events was confused thanks to having little sense of the passage of time, and tiny discrepancies were taken as indicators that he'd simply made the whole ordeal up. However, several investigators were able to corroborate at least some of the basic details of Alvarenga's story. Experts even pointed out that the fresh meat from the seabirds and turtles that Alvarenga had lived on were rich in vitamin C, and that would have gone a long way in preventing scurvy. As for the rest of what happened out at sea, the only account we have is from Alvarenga himself, who would go on to give a series of interviews about his experience. One investigative journalist named Jonathan Franklin would publish Alvarenga's story in a book titled 438 Days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea. By many accounts, José Salvador Alvarenga wasn't supposed to survive his ordeal, and in some ways, he didn't. He returned to the world a changed man, a once fearless, experienced fisherman who now dreaded the thought of going back onto the water. There are still nights when I can't sleep. The ocean keeps haunting me. Now check out the shocking true castaway, incredible survivor story, Thomas Musgrave, or watch this instead.